Liberty Nation. Truth is making a comeback.
Hi, this is Tim Donner with LNTV, and there was a shocking turn in the investigation into Donald Trump by the FBI by special counsel Robert Mueller on Monday as the FBI raided the offices of Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's personal lawyer who allegedly made that $130,000 payment to porn star Stormy Daniels. And joining us to discuss this case is Scott Cosenza, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor. And Scott, the lawyer for Mr. Cohen, Stephen Ryan, says that Cohen had been cooperating. It turned over hundreds of documents, and thus the raid was unnecessary. So why did they do it? A reasonable suspicion that key documents were being withheld, or just pure intimidation?
Well, Tim, they had to convince a judge that they had reasonable suspicion that Mr. Cohen had documents there that are either themselves evidence of a crime or part of a crime. And so that's that's what you need to get a search warrant. And we presume that that's what they were able to get and swear before a judge that issued that warrant.
Now, is it perfectly fine for the FBI to seize documents that are protected by attorney-client privileges, as many of these seized documents are, according to the lawyer for Mr. Cohen?
Tim, the attorney-client privilege is fairly well defined, and what it covers is that, and we're talking about Mr. Trump and Mr. Cohen here. So if Mr. Trump is the client and Mr. Cohen is the attorney-client privilege covers any communications made between the two of them that are seeking legal advice or in furtherance of the seeking of legal advice. If, however, there's evidence that of a crime, that of an ongoing crime or a conspiracy to commit a crime, so that would not be covered by the attorney-client privilege for Mr. Trump. It's a privilege that Mr. Trump could exercise if, for instance, he said to, let's say hypothetically, he said to Mr. Cohen in a communication, I defrauded somebody, or I committed a Federal Election Commission violation, violated the election laws, and I need some help in dealing with that. That communication would be privileged, and it could not be used against Mr. Trump. If, however, he said to Mr. Cohen, and I'm not alleging that this has taken place, but if, as a hypothetical, he said to Mr. Cohen, let's figure out a way to violate federal election law so that I can win the presidency, that in and of itself, that would not be privileged communication and could be used against Mr. Trump. Now, the other thing we have to bear in mind is that
excuse me, Scott, for just a second. Now, is that determination made after the fact as to whether you seize documents that are subject to attorney-client privilege, and then what? You decide later whether that's germane to a crime that was being cooked up between the client and his attorney? When is that determination made?
The privilege, Tim, belongs to the client, and it's up to the client to assert the privilege. The time when they would assert it is when it would be used against them, or in perhaps an investigative proceeding. But we don't know that the records sought in this instance were being sought in an investigation or in an effort to incriminate Mr. Trump. It's quite possible that these records were sought in order to incriminate Mr. Cohen, in which case privilege is not part of the equation. We don't know if Mr. Cohen is a target of the investigation or some ancillary actor in the investigation at this point. So we're going to have to wait and see if we ever see, what evidence is presented in a court against somebody as a result of this raid, and then we might get some insight into the reason why, and then Mr. Trump might be able to assert his privilege. I'm guessing that because this wasn't approved just by some junior level Department of Justice official. So given the scope and the import of this raid, I have to assume, at least until we see otherwise, that those I's were dotted and T's were crossed.
So, Scott, how is hush money given to a porn star relevant to a special counsel hired for a counterintelligence investigation on Russian interference in an election? And that's what it is. It's a counterintelligence investigation. It's not a criminal investigation.
Tim, once you pull the pin on that special prosecutor, you don't know what you're going to get, and it's a reason why perhaps we shouldn't pull the pin that often. I don't know the answer to your question. I would say that it's probably not relevant, but we have a special prosecutor, and prosecutors like to prosecute crimes. Like, a soda jerk likes to pour sodas, and that's what we can expect from this person, is to identify violations of the federal criminal law, of which there are more than can be counted, by the way. Let's make that clear. And to prosecute same. And it's not surprising at all that any person who's given a personal prosecutor, which is what we have in the case of the special prosecutor, can find evidence of violations of the federal criminal law. It's something that I've been railing against for years, is this proliferation of laws that we have that no normal person could even keep track of, much less pledge to not violate. So,
well, mainstream media outlets, or establishment or legacy or elite media outlets, are referring to the affair between, they're referring to it as an affair between Trump and Stormy Daniels, which leads one to believe it was an ongoing relationship, when in fact, by Ms. Daniels' own account on her famous 60 Minutes interview, she said it was a one-night stand. So why, Scott, does places, CNBC, for example, which is supposed to be somewhat mainstream, referred to it as an affair she had with Trump that began in 2006? So the misreporting on this makes it seem as though this was some sort of steamy affair that took place over years, when in fact it was, one night in a hotel room, according to Stormy Daniels.
Tim, I would not give a single dollar to Stormy Daniels to hear her in-depth account of goings-on between her and Donald Trump. I don't understand why. I think it was In Touch magazine initially agreed to pay her $15,000 in 2011 or 12, and then withdrew that offer after being threatened by Mr. Cohen with a lawsuit on behalf of Mr. Trump, or why there were multiple offers of it in the lead up to the election, or why now it would be worth probably deep into seven figures to her. We do know, by the way, that she is now, after the publication of the 60 Minutes interview, she's the #1 porn star in the country, and her dance engagement bookings are off the charts. I don't understand the attraction. The idea of paying money and leaving the house to go see somebody dance erotically just on the basis of knowing that they were at one time intimate with Donald Trump does not make a whole lot of sense to me. But the market, you can't argue with the market, Tim, and the market wants this story and this person's. So, yeah, I don't have a better answer than that for you. Sorry.
Well, this discussion sure went off the rails now, didn't it?
Yeah,
but let's
we did not
cover
that in law school.
No, we didn't, and we didn't cover that in our pre-production meeting either. Right. But so let's get to the bottom line, Scott. How are we to interpret this development, this raid of Michael Cohen's offices, his hotel room, and other places? Does this automatically mean they're turning up the heat on the Bunsen burner under Donald Trump? Or could this be more about trying to bag more peripheral figures, such as they did with Michael Flynn and Paul Manafort?
It could very well be that, Tim, and we won't know the real answer until we get an accounting from the special counsel's office or indictments come down. I can tell you this. Usually raiding the office is not a good sign. And if I were Mr. Cohen, I'd be getting my affairs in order in anticipation of being arrested and charged with a federal criminal offense. Sad to say.
Well, on that uplifting note, Scott, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Tim.
And you can see more of Scott's insights on LibertyNation.com. He is our legal affairs editor. I'm Tim Donner, and this is LNTV.
Liberty Nation. News and commentary, minus the propaganda. LibertyNation.com.